Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the Geometry Dash quilt along with me. This is Janice from pt2. Today we're going to be prepping and cutting all of our fabric, and I'm going to show you exactly how to turn all of those pieces into the bits that we need to make our blocks. Stay tuned. Okay, to prepare your fabrics for cutting, I recommend giving them a nice ironing. And you want to line up along the selvage. If you're totally new to quilting, the selvage is the area along the side that is pulled through the rollers when printing, and it has the copyright information such like as the title of the design, the manufacturer, perhaps the artist who designed the fabric, and the year that it was created. So you want to line that up. So we will cut that off when we get to that point, and you'll see that later in the video, but you can see here how there's creases in my fabric. I want to minimize any wrinkles or offcuts that I might get from running over those curves. So I'm just going to heat up my iron and give that a nice press so it's nice and flat. That's pretty straightforward. Then with those selvages lined up, you want to try to line up the bottom edge of your fabric as well. You can trim that off nice and straight over at your cutting mat. But if you've cut into the fabric before, you may be ready to go. And then we will just cut from the bottom up, and I will show you that there. So I'm just going to prepare a few of my fabrics and get them ready for cutting. And I think for the pink section, I am going to need maybe some extra fabric just because these are a lot longer than the colors, the other color strips that I've already cut. So I may also incorporate some orange, so you may see that in a later video as well. But for this, all I'm going to do is prep my fabric and then get cutting. I like to layer and cut several at a time. Then you can see sometimes when you line up the selvage, you might have parts that were not cut evenly, and that's why you would want to trim at the bottom so that you're starting with a nice straight lined up edge so that everything is going to measure the same. So that's what we're checking right now, and that's the importance of prepping your fabric for this part. Okay, so I would take that over and I would trim everything off nice and straight so I have one nice straight edge to start working from, and then I will layer fabrics up as I go. I usually try to cut several layers at a time. So with my Heather Ross fabric, I would have it folded in half. This is a fat quarter size cut, so I would fold it in half there, and I would cut through those 2 layers. But if you want to be even more efficient, you can line up your fabrics at the selvage again with another piece that's folded in half, and then you could cut through 4 layers at a time. I typically don't go more than 4 layers just because I find that my blade starts to skip and won't cut through that. And while I'm mentioning that, on your rotary cutter, which mine is right here, it's a Fiskars, you probably want to start with a fresh blade when you're working on this. So if you've never changed your blade, there's a little knob that's a screw back here, and you just loosen that up. You buy the circular blades, they usually come in a pack. You can get several at once. You would pop that out and be very careful not to cut your fingers. They're very sharp. Even when they're too dull to cut fabric, they're very sharp on your hand. Also, if you have been cutting a lot with your rotary cutter, just like all tools in your sewing room, they probably get fiber in them, and that can contribute to them skipping and not working well. So take a minute. You can always like clean away some of that fuzz so it is a little bit better contact there, and there's not like goopy little bits of fuzzies all over your things. So sometimes that can also help your tools just by maintaining and giving them a little clean. So then you will put your blade and line it up with the hole. You put your blade guard on where it goes, and usually it has little notch, like a flat side that you line up with the flat side on your blade, and a curved side that you line up on the curved side. It's much harder to do this on camera than in real life, I promise. And then you just pop your blade back on there and tighten your screw, and then you will have replace your blade with something that's nice and sharp. And of course, sharp blades reduce injuries and, cutting mistakes. Okay, so let's get cutting. Another thing I'd like to pop in really quickly and just say about using the iron is that here you can see there's a very large selvage edge on this piece of fabric. And if I went with just the way that it was cut and folded and sent to me, when I trim that selvage off, I would be trimming off about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of fabric over here that's perfectly good, that's fine, it already has a cut edge. So when I'm using my iron, I might shift the fold and pull it down here a little bit so that my cut edge that's already ready to go is lining up a little bit over, just a little bit over where I will trim off my selvage. So now I'm not going to be wasting all of that fabric and trimming off something that's essentially already been trimmed. And now with my iron, I can press out this little fold that I've made that might sit unevenly, and it's going to help keep my fabric nice and lined up when I move it over to the cutting board. So that would be the advantage there, is that you can press things to where you want to cut them as well as getting those creases out to achieve the most accurate cut. Because cutting your fabric accurately is extremely helpful in the final product. Again, like sewing and paying attention to your seams is important, and so is cutting for accuracy. So those are a couple of points where if you find that your quilts aren't quite coming together the way that you thought they would, it's time to pay attention to those little details. That's the kind of stuff that can make or break a pattern sometime, or make it come out looking more professional versus looking more amateurish. Okay, so that's a little tip. For cutting my large squares for the background, I am going to take a yardage piece. I have several yards here that I'm going to cut all at once, and I'm going to line up all of the ends. You can see this one needs to be straightened, so I will show how I do that. So first of all, it's been folded, it's been ironed to the best of my ability. I am going to line my selvage up along one of my grid lines on the mat, okay? And that will get trimmed off. But I'm going to start by neatening the end. So I want to get everything that I know is a little bit raggedy and needs trimmed off over whatever line on the grid makes the most sense, that you won't be cutting off a ton of extra waste fabric, but you'll be catching every raggedy end so you can start with a nice clean cut. And then I am just going to go ahead, line my ruler up along that line using the grid, and cut right through all of those layers, making a nice straight cut that can be my starting point. So now you can see every single one of those edges is nice and straight. They're all lined up. They're all at one even line across the ruler. So now when I go to measure off of that and I line my ruler up from there, I should be good to go. So cutting for the background squares is quite easy. If you have a 6.5 inch ruler, it would just be the entire width. So I'm gonna go ahead and whip a few of these out, and then the next video will be all about putting your blocks together. So the Geometry Dash block is a log cabin style, so it will be using the pieces that we've prepared today in this video and applying them to the circular rotation around the block that will create the final product. And then these background squares that I'm cutting today will go in the corners to complete our block. So I think cutting the background is basically how I work through all of the cutting process. Here I'm using up a little bit of scraps. Already had the selvage cut out. I just trimmed it up so that it was neat along one side. You can see my very professional cutting method. I just use my fingers and count over across the grid and then line up and cut along that edge to make my pieces. And I just am going to work my way through an entire stack of one color. cutting in the way that makes the most sense to use up what I have. And sometimes I open them up and use the little end pieces because I don't like to have any waste. Although on this project, you'll have nice pieces left over perhaps at the end. Sometimes I will patch all of those together and make an additional project or make something that can go on the back of your quilt. So here's another piece. Basically, just to review, I'm lining it up, I'm creating that nice straight edge to work off of, and then I'm using the grid ruler and the grid on my mat to make sure that I'm cutting straight in accordance with the pattern directions. And of course, all of that stuff is included for you. And there's my shoulder. There I'm lining up and trimming off the selvage, and then I'm going to count over and cut to the length that I need for this particular piece. All of that's included for each different width around the central block and as well as the central block. So on that, we're just going to do a little bit more fussy cutting to make sure that you have whatever image that you would like. But all of that kind of direction is included in the patterns, again, which you can find in my shop, pt2.etsy.com. And I am just going to work through trimming up every little piece that I have, and then I sort them into the different color piles and make sure that I have enough to work my way around the entire pattern with things that coordinate. If you want to use a bunch of scraps, you can do that. I would just say try to keep them the same brightness so that they are really reinforcing the pattern as you work your way around the block. And there are the green strips that I cut as well, so you can see I have some different lighter and darker tones, and I would want to put those on the opposite sides just so that it has that balance when I'm creating my log cabin style block. And you can see that here. And I just sort everything, make sure that I get a nice assortment that goes with each central block, and that's it. I hope that you found this informative and useful as you prep yourself to make a geometry dash block. Again, that pattern is available for sale in my Etsy shop at leroudefleur.etsy.com, and you can go ahead and grab that and join me, and we'll make a beautiful quilt with our Heather Ross or other amazing large print feature fabrics. So thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to keep quilting along with me. I very much appreciate your support. Stay creative, friends.